God, I need a haircut and I can't get one. All the barbershops are closed. So I read Pierce Brown's Red Rising. Let's talk about it. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. My name is Alex, and this is another book review. So, Red Rising by Pierce Brown is book one of the Red Rising Trilogy. This is a sci-fi, dystopian, fantasy amalgamation of genres kind of book. This was sort of a roller coaster for me because I went from absolutely hating it to liking it to hating it to loving it by the end. So I'm happy to say that I did finish it after almost not finishing it probably 3 or 4 times throughout the probably first half of the book, I'd say. There was one point in the book where I kind of sat back and I was just like, do I hate this book? And the answer was, at the time, yes. And then I kept reading because it was one of those situations where I was just like, okay, am I missing something? Like, this is kind of reading like a YA Hunger Games-ish style book. It felt kind of juvenile. A bunch of random compound words were thrown around with no explanation to what any of them meant or why people said these words. It kind of felt like it was a teenager writing this for a good amount of the book, and that honestly was a turnoff. And then it almost flips a switch later in the book when you get to the main bulk of the story. It sort of gets better. I don't really know how else to put it. It got a lot better towards the end, and it ended on a point where I was just like, okay, I'm in it, I'm engaged, I need to read more of this. And after hearing that the rest of the books are way better than book one, that really drew me in because I was like, all right, I can see where this is going. I think the story is going to get more interesting. I really want to finish it and get through the entire trilogy. So let's go on to book 2. I forgot to put the books in the background. So now they're there. So I would have to say up front, one of my biggest complaints initially with this story, outside of the dialogue and the kind of YA-ish feel to it, was the main character of Darrow. Oftentimes throughout this story, it sort of felt like he accomplishes a lot of things that he didn't really earn, and that typically happens in a YA story. So the more I was reading it, I was like, okay, this is really starting to grind on me. All these things that I would see in a younger audience style book are coming true. Luckily, that didn't last for too long, and by the end of it, like I said, I did enjoy this book way more than I expected to, and it's definitely not YA. It's absolutely not Hunger Games, even though there are some points when you get to the games or tournament style portion of this book, there are definitely things like proctors watching certain people or students and giving them gifts because they favor them, and that's kind of Hunger Game-ish. Other than that though, outside of the tournament, I wouldn't really say that this compares to Hunger Games really in any way at all, so I was happy to say that. And now I'm going to stop talking about Hunger Games because I'm talking about Red Rising. Okay, so what is this book about? So this book is about our main character, Darrow, and he's what's known as a Red. So in the society that lives on Mars in the distant, distant future, they are a caste system. They've kind of done away with democracy for whatever reason, and they have a caste system. This is built around colors. So at the top you have the golds, who are kind of the noble society. They're better than everybody, they're prettier, they don't work, you know, crappy underpaid jobs like the Reds do, who are at the very bottom of the pyramid. I don't actually think it was included in book 1, but in book 2, and I'll show it here, they have basically a chart at the beginning of the book that shows the hierarchy and all the colors. This book though really only focuses on the reds and the golds. You do hear some mentions of other colors like blue, green, silver, obsidian, things like that. But this main focus is the reds, who are kind of the slave society. They're the workers, they go in the mines, they work all the crappy jobs that nobody else will do. And the golds, like I said, are kind of the overlords. They rule everything and kind of push the reds around. Now this story starts off with Darrow in the mines. He's what's called a helldiver. So he's mining for these different materials, and him and all the other Reds are being told that they're terraforming Mars for future generations to come live there. They are told that the surface isn't inhabitable yet, and they are the ones that are setting this place up as a haven to live on when, you know, other planets are no longer feasible. And they think, cool, like, this job sucks, but we're setting this up for our family and their family's family for generations to come. You find out rather quickly that that's kind of all a lie. And without spoiling too much, all I will say is that people live on Mars already. once Darrow goes through a transformation at a certain point in the book, he starts to see things unraveling. His entire world as he knew it was not really true, and the Golds essentially just lied to everybody. The Reds are slave workers. They're kept underground so that they don't see that up on the surface people have been living there for years already, decades even. I mean, there's entire cities constructed. Like, people have been up there for a while, and the Reds didn't know any of that. So as in my Rage of Dragons review, I compared this book a lot to that book, and that is because the main character very early on in the book suffers a great loss in his life, which kind of leads him down this path of revenge, vengeance, rage, hatred against society and those that rule it. And that's what really thrusts him into this journey of bringing the whole thing down. So with that, as I said, Darrow does kind of do a lot of things in this book that I don't really feel like he earned. It's almost as if he just accomplishes a lot of things without really taking too many losses himself. And that can kind of be a turnoff, because I like my characters to have to grow through their loss and their suffering. Throughout the book, he kind of wins battles and gains friendships and things without really having to prove himself too much, and that kind of got on my nerves a little bit. I've been told, though, that in the following books that does not happen, and that's super cool, because that will make his character all the more interesting. And a lot of the side characters in this book, honestly, were more interesting than Darrow. So you have characters like Mustang that you meet, or Severo, or Cassius. There's a bunch of different people that are far more interesting than Darrow, who is our main protagonist. And this book is actually told through his point of view. Now, I'm told this changes in the sequels, which is a good thing, because this book only follows Darrow as the POV chapters. You see everything that he sees. I like when they have different POVs set up, so you, the reader, are not in the eyes of the main character, so that they can actually be surprised, and then it's surprising to you, as opposed to seeing everything through his eyes, where it kind of negates a lot of that. Something I did like, though, was the fact that this didn't take place on Earth. This was pulling a lot from fantasy, but because it's a sci-fi dystopian kind of setting on Mars, it definitely gets away from that. However, at a certain point in the story, I forgot completely that they were even on Mars, because there are chapters upon chapters where they're describing the scenery and the fields and the mountains, and it just sounded like Earth to me. So I'm hoping that in book 2, and I've read that it does this, expands on that like crazy, really brings in the sci-fi, the dystopian setting, and kind of gets away from just being placed on Earth, which I kind of felt like this book abandoned the sci-fi elements after the first third, maybe. Now, again, one of my bigger gripes with this, along with the dialogue and the random use of compound words and things like that I already mentioned, was some of the pacing early on, and that's mainly because it's only told from Darrow's perspective. So if he's not actively engaged in something, or something is happening to him, it almost feels like the story can drag a little bit at times. Now, it gets way better further into the story, and once you get past that halfway point, I'd say maybe even a little bit before it, it gets a lot more interesting. The story picks up, the pacing ends up being relentless basically halfway through. It started to remind me a lot of Rage of Dragons, because I mean, that book, you just go chapter to chapter, combat to combat, just relentless violence and pacing, and this book became that, but it definitely did not start that way. So overall, I would just end with, I almost didn't finish this book multiple times, but personally, I hate not finishing books. It tears at me to not finish a book. The only book this year that I have not finished was World War Z, and we'll talk about that later. I just didn't enjoy it. But even with like Assassin's Apprentice, which I read earlier this year, I almost didn't finish that book multiple times. And by the end of it, I was like, okay, I see where this is going. This has potential to get better, and again, I've been told that Farseer trilogy gets a lot better, and everything else in the realm of the Elderlings gets better, so I'm going to go through those as well. Same thing happened with this book. Book 1, halfway through, almost didn't finish it, put it down, kind of thought I hated the book, fought through it, bounced between the audiobook, which is fantastic, by the way, whoever the narrator was, put his name right there, good job. I ended up loving the book by the end of it, and I think I gave it a 4 out of 5 on Goodreads. I ended up really enjoying it, and I am super excited to see what else this author does in the rest of this trilogy. And then I believe Iron Gold and Dark Age, which I don't have because they don't have it in paperback yet. I buy pretty much everything in paperback, so I might just have to buy the hardback because that's all that's out. And there is a 6th book coming out, so that's 2 trilogies, and apparently those get even darker and really lean hard into grimdark after the original Red Rising Trilogy, so very looking forward to that. But those are my spoiler-free thoughts on the first book in the Red Rising Trilogy. I definitely want to see where this story goes, so I'm absolutely going to be reading Golden Sun immediately because the end of Red Rising really hooked me and pulled me in, and I want to see where it goes. So again, guys, thank you for tuning in. Please leave a comment down below if you like the video, you want to chat about anything about Red Rising, if this made you any more or less interested in the book. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And as always, if you do enjoy these reviews, please like and subscribe to the channel. I also just did a what I read in March, which this is included in, so there's a brief summary of what I thought about the book in that video as well. But until next time, guys, keep reading.